The first human the Veyrans ever saw was dying. He fell from the sky inside a burning metal capsule. It happened during the third moonrise of the harvest season, when the people of Veyra were preparing for the festival. Of Three Sons' children were decorating the streets with glowing flowers, merchants were closing their shops, families were gathering around warm fires, and then the sky screamed, a streak of blue-white. Fire crossed the clouds, everyone looked up. The object was moving far too fast. It struck the mountains beyond the eastern valley with such force that the ground shook beneath the city. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the Veyran emergency bells began ringing. 20 minutes later, a rescue team reached the crash site. Their leader, Medical Officer Lyra Ven, climbed over the smoking wreckage. "What is it?" one of the soldiers asked. "I don't know." The object was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was small, heavily armored, and badly damaged. Half of it was buried beneath stone. Lyra approached the broken hatch. Something was moving inside. She froze. "There's someone alive." Her soldiers immediately raised their weapons. Lyra looked at them. "Lower those." "But, Commander." "Lower them." The hatch was forced. And smoke poured into the night. Inside was a creature none of them had ever encountered. 2 arms, 2 legs, a strange armored uniform, dark ink, hair, pale skin, and blood. A lot of blood. The alien opened his eyes for barely a second. He looked at Lyra. Then he whispered something, "Earth," and collapsed. The Veyrans carried him to their medical center. For 3 days, he remained unconscious, his body confused every doctor. His bones were unusually dense, his muscles were incredibly strong. His blood chemistry was unlike anything in Veyran medical records. And despite his injuries, his body kept repairing itself. On the 4th day, the human opened his eyes. Lyra was sitting beside him. The human immediately reached for something at his waist. There was nothing there. His eyes moved around the room. Then he saw Lyra. He stared. Lyra stared. But neither understood the other. Finally, the human spoke. "Where am I?" Lyra activated the translation device. After several seconds, it converted his words. "Where am I?" Lyra nearly jumped. "You can understand us?" The human looked confused. "I can understand you now." The translator continued learning his language. "What is your name?" The human hesitated. "Captain Daniel Carter," Lyra smiled. "Carefully, I'm Lyra Ven." Daniel tried to sit up. One immediately forced him back down. Lyra pushed him gently onto the bed. "Don't move." Daniel looked at his injured body. "How long?" 4 days. His expression changed. "My ship?" "Destroyed." "My crew?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Daniel understood. "Dead?" "I'm sorry." Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment. The room was silent. Then Lyra noticed something unexpected. A human was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently. A single tear rolled down his face. Lyra had never seen a soldier cry. She didn't know what to do, so she simply placed her hand on his shoulder. "We found you." Daniel opened his eyes. "You saved me." "Oh, yes, why?" Lyra looked confused. "Because you were dying," Daniel stared at her. "You didn't know." "Maybe no. You didn't know what I was." You didn't know if I was dangerous." Lyra smiled. "You were bleeding," she shrugged. "That was enough." Daniel remembered those words. He would remember them for the rest of his life. 3 weeks later, Daniel could walk. The Veyrans had repaired what they could of his equipment. His communicator was destroyed. His weapons were gone. His ship could never fly again, but Daniel had survived. And during those 3 weeks, something strange happened. The people of Veyra became fascinated by him. Children followed him through the streets. Scientists asked endless questions. Soldiers challenged him to physical tests. Daniel politely refused most of them, mostly because he didn't want to explain why a supposedly injured human could lift things 3 times heavier than a Veyran soldier. Eventually, Lyra asked him the question everyone wanted answered. "How many humans are there?" Daniel looked at her. "On Earth?" "Yes, about 10 billion. Lyra almost dropped her cup. 10 billion? Daniel nodded. Lyra stared at him. "Your species has 10 billion people." "Approximately." "And how many soldiers?" Daniel smiled. That's a complicated question. Why? Because almost everyone learns how to fight. Lyra laughed. You are joking. Daniel didn't laugh. No. Daniel stayed on Veyra for another month. During that time, he learned about the planet. The Veyrans were peaceful. They had never conquered another civilization. They had no large military. Their orbital defense system existed mainly to stop pirates. They believed most intelligent species could solve their problems through negotiation. Daniel thought that was admirable. He also thought it was dangerous. Before leaving, Lyra took him to a hill overlooking the capital. You are going home tomorrow. Daniel nodded. The rescue ship arrives in the morning. Lyra looked at the stars. Will you remember Veyra? Daniel smiled. I'll never forget it. Lyra looked at him. You are a strange species, Daniel Carter. How so? You have the strength to destroy things. She looked toward the city, but you seem to prefer protecting them. Daniel was quiet. Finally, he said, That's what we're supposed to do. Lyra smiled. Then perhaps we will meet again. Daniel looked at her. You will. Lyra laughed. You sound very certain. Daniel extended his hand. If Veyra ever needs help, call Earth. Lyra shook his hand. Even if it takes years, even if it takes 100. She didn't realize it then. Those words would one day save her entire world. 5 years passed. Veyra continued its peaceful life. The children who had once followed Daniel through the streets became young adults. Lyra became the chief medical officer of the planet, and the story of the strange human became almost a legend. Then the Carvax arrived. They came without warning. 37 warships appeared beyond the planet's moon. The Veyran defense network detected them. A transmission followed. This system is now under Carvax authority. The Veyrans didn't understand. Their president requested negotiations. The Carvax commander laughed. You misunderstand. His face appeared on every communication screen. We are not asking. The Veyran defense fleet launched. It lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. The entire planetary fleet was destroyed. Carvax ships entered orbit. Cities surrendered. Power stations were seized. Communication towers were destroyed. Then the bombardment began. Lyra stood in the medical center as explosions lit the sky. Children were screaming. Buildings were collapsing. She looked toward the stars and remembered a human. A human who had once been dying. A human she had saved because he was bleeding. She ran toward the communication room. Get the long-range transmitter. The technician stared at her. That system hasn't been used in years. Activate it. But we don't know if anyone will answer. Lyra looked at him. I know someone who will. The transmission traveled through deep space. For nearly 4 hours, nothing happened. Then something answered. A voice. Human. Unknown. Veyran transmission, identify yourself. Lyra almost cried. This is Veyra. Silence then. Veyra. The human operator suddenly sounded more alert. Please repeat, this is Veyra, we need help. A pause. Then the operator asked, What happened? Lyra looked through the shattered window. The capital was burning. The Carvax came. Another pause. Then the human voice became cold. How many civilians? Approximately 6 million still alive in the capital. Military strength? Destroyed. Orbital defenses? Gone. How long until complete occupation? Lyra looked at the sky. Perhaps 6 hours. The human operator said only one sentence. Hold on. The transmission ended. 6 hours later, the Carvax commander stood above the planet. He was smiling. Begin final occupation. Then one of his officers shouted, Commander, what? We have ships. Whose? The officer looked at the sensor screen. His face went pale. Unknown. How many? 100. The commander laughed. Only 100? The officer swallowed. More just appeared. The screen filled with lights. 200, 500, 1,000. The commander stopped smiling. What are those? The officer whispered, human ships. Silence filled the bridge. The Carvax had fought humans before. Never successfully, but their intelligence reports had always described humanity as divided. Different governments, different fleets, different political factions. They had believed that humans would never unite for another species. They were wrong. Because the fleet arriving above Veyra wasn't one government's military, it was humanity's response. The human commander opened a channel. "This is Admiral Marcus Hale of the Terran Defense Fleet." The Carvax commander appeared. "You have entered Carvax-controlled space." Admiral Hale looked at him. "You attacked Veyra. They are under our authority." "No," Hale's voice remained calm. "They're under our protection." The Carvax commander laughed. "You have no treaty with them." Hale leaned forward. "We don't need one." The human fleet moved, not recklessly, not wildly, with terrifying precision. The first human ships attacked the Carvax communication network. The second group destroyed their long-range sensors. The third group disabled their jump engines. The Carvax fleet suddenly found itself blind. Then the human carriers opened. Thousands of fighters launched. The sky above Veyra became a storm of light. Carvax ships fired. Human ships dodged. Human ships returned fire. One Carvax battleship attempted to escape. A human cruiser appeared directly behind it. The Carvax commander stared at the screen. How did they? The cruiser fired. The battleship disappeared. Across the system, the same thing happened. Humanity wasn't simply stronger. Humanity was experienced. The Carvax had conquered dozens of peaceful civilizations. Humanity had spent centuries fighting wars against itself. They had learned every mistake, every strategy, every trick, every possible way a battle could go wrong. And now they were using all of that knowledge to defend people who had once saved one human life. On the surface, Lyra watched the battle from the roof of the medical center. A burning Carvax ship fell through the clouds. The entire city cheered. Then a shadow passed overhead. A massive human transport descended. Its doors opened. Human soldiers stepped out. The first one removed his helmet. Lyra recognized the face. Older, scarred, but unmistakable Daniel Carter. Lyra stared at him. "Daniel." He smiled. "Hello, Lyra." She ran toward him. They embraced. For several seconds, neither said anything. Then Lyra stepped back. "You came." Daniel looked around at the ruined city. "You called?" "I didn't think," Daniel interrupted gently. "You saved my life." Lyra looked at the thousands of human soldiers behind him. "We saved one human." Daniel looked toward the sky. "No." He smiled. "You saved one of ours." The war ended before sunset. The Carvax surrendered. Their surviving ships were disarmed. The human fleet could have destroyed them. Instead, Admiral Hale offered the Carvax soldiers a choice: leave Veyran territory peacefully, or remain and face trial for their crimes. The Carvax left. Humanity stayed. For months, human engineers rebuilt Veyra. Hospitals were restored, cities were repaired, orbital defenses were rebuilt. But something more important changed. The Veyrans stopped seeing humans as mysterious outsiders. They saw them as friends. One evening, Lyra stood with Daniel on the same hill where they had spoken 5 years earlier. The city below was glowing again. Lyra looked at him. "Do humans always do this?" "Do what?" "Return for people who helped them." Daniel smiled. "Not always." Lyra looked surprised. "Then why us?" Daniel looked at the city. "Because when I was dying, your people didn't ask what I could give them." He looked at her. "They simply helped." Lyra smiled. "That's all?" Daniel nodded. "Sometimes that's everything." Above them, hundreds of human ships moved silently across the stars. Veyra was no longer alone, and across the galaxy, other civilizations heard what had happened. They learned something important that day. Humanity could be an enemy. Humanity could be a terrifying enemy. But if you showed kindness to a human when you had nothing to gain, you might gain something far more powerful than an ally. You might gain all of humanity. And from that day forward, a new saying spread across the galaxy. Never forget the hand that saves a human. Because someday, humanity might return the favor. 3 months after the Carvax War, Veyra was beginning to heal. The ruined buildings were being rebuilt. The hospitals were full, but no longer with wounded. Soldiers, human engineers worked beside Veyran workers. Human. Doctors trained Veyran medical teams, and for the first time in Veyran history, human warships remained permanently in orbit. The people of Veyra felt safe, perhaps too safe, because humanity had made one mistake. They had assumed the Carvax were the real enemy. They weren't. The Carvax had only been the first warning. Admiral Marcus Hale was standing inside the command center when every alarm in the room suddenly activated. What's happening? The sensor officer looked at his screen. I don't know. Explain. I can't. Hale walked toward the tactical display at the edge of the Veyran system. Something had appeared. Not a ship, not a fleet, something much larger. The object was nearly the size of a moon. It had no engines, no visible weapons, no communication signal. It simply appeared then. The sensors began failing one by one. The room became silent. Hale stared at the screen. How did it get here? The sensor officer swallowed. It didn't enter the system. Then how did it arrive? It was already here. Hale's expression hardened. What? The officer pointed toward the planet. It was hiding behind Veyra's moon. On the surface, Daniel Carter was visiting the medical center. Lyra was showing him a newly rebuilt emergency ward. You should see the children's wing. Daniel smiled. You rebuilt all this in 3 months? Humans helped? We did. Lyra looked at him. Why? Daniel shrugged. Because you needed help. Lyra smiled. You humans have a strange answer for everything. Before Daniel could reply, every light in the building went arc. The floor shook. A deep sound rolled. Across the city, Lyra ran toward the window. The sky had changed. A black circle had appeared above the clouds, then another and another. Thousands of tiny black objects began descending. Daniel immediately recognized them drones. Lyra looked at him. What kind? Daniel's face became serious. The kind that don't negotiate. The human defense fleet launched. Thousands of fighters rose from orbit, but the strange objects didn't attack. Then they simply passed through the fleet. Human. Weapons did nothing. Missiles passed through them. Lasers passed through them. Even physical impacts failed. Hale stared at the tactical display. What are they doing? The answer came seconds later. Every drone stopped above a major city. Then they released something. A wave of energy spread across the planet. Every communication system died. Every power station shut down. Every human ship lost contact with the others. Veyra went dark. Daniel and Lyra stood in the darkness of the medical center. What happened? Lyra asked. Electronic warfare. Can you stop it? Daniel looked upward. Not from here. A noise came from outside. Metal footsteps, then another. Lyra reached for a weapon. Daniel stopped her. Don't. Why? Because those aren't drones. The doors exploded. Inward, 3 enormous machines entered the building. They were almost 3 meters tall, black armor, 4 arms, no visible faces, red lights glowing beneath their helmets. Lyra raised her weapon. Daniel stepped forward. The machine stopped. One of them spoke. Human. Daniel froze. The machine continued. You have been identified. By whom? The architect. Daniel looked at Lyra. Do you know what that means? She shook her head. No. Daniel looked back at the machines. Neither do I. The machine raised one arm. Your species has violated containment. Daniel frowned. Containment? You were never supposed to leave your system. Daniel laughed. That's the worst excuse for an invasion I've ever heard. The machine attacked. Daniel moved before Lyra could react. He grabbed the machine's arm. The impact drove both of them through the wall. The second machine charged. Lyra fired. The weapon barely slowed it. Daniel rolled across the floor, grabbed a metal support beam and swung it into the machine. The beam bent. The machine didn't. It grabbed Daniel by the chest, then lifted him. Lyra screamed. Daniel! Daniel looked at her. Run! She refused. Instead, she picked up a medical laser. She aimed it at the machine's exposed neck and fired. The machine released Daniel. It staggered. Daniel immediately attacked. He struck the same damaged area. Again, The machine collapsed. Lyra stared. "You found a weakness." Daniel looked at the broken machine. "No," he shook his head. "It found a reason to underestimate us." Above Veyra, Admiral Hale was facing the same machines. His fleet was losing. For the first time since humanity arrived, human ships were being destroyed faster than they could respond. A transmission finally came through, a distorted voice. "You have been warned." Hale stared at the screen. "Who are you?" "We are the architects, and what do you want?" "Humanity." Hale remained silent. "Then why?" The voice answered. "Because humanity is not supposed to exist." The transmission ended. Hale slowly turned toward his officers. "Find Daniel Carter." Hours later, the human fleet was forced to retreat. Veyra remained under attack. Daniel and Lyra reached the emergency bunker beneath the city. Thousands of civilians were hiding. There, children, families, medical workers, old people. Everyone was terrified. Then the ground shook. Voice echoed through the bunker. "Humanity, everyone," became silent. The architect's voice continued. "You have 3 choices. Leave Veyra, surrender your military technology, or watch this world die." Daniel looked at Lyra. She looked back, then something unexpected happened. A little Veyran child stepped forward. She was perhaps 6 years old. She looked at Daniel. "Are you going to leave?" Daniel crouched beside her. "No, why?" Daniel smiled. "Because you saved my life." Once, the child didn't understand. Lyra did. Daniel stood. He looked at the terrified people around him. Then he opened his communicator. Admiral Hale, static, then a voice. "Daniel, how bad?" "We've lost 30% of the fleet." Daniel looked at the bunker. "And the architects?" "They haven't committed their main force." Daniel understood. "So this is only the beginning." "Yes." Daniel closed his eyes. Then he smiled. "Good." Hale was silent. "Good?" Daniel looked toward the ceiling. "If they're holding back," he opened his eyes, "then so are we." 6 hours later, every human ship in the Veyran system disappeared. The architects believed humanity had fled. Their forces moved toward the planet. Millions of machines entered the atmosphere. The architects began their final assault. Then, their sensors detected something. A signal, not from Veyra, not from Earth, from deep space. The architect commander looked at the display. "What is that?" The answer came slowly. "Unknown fleet size." The sensor operator stared. "Impossible." "Report. 1 million ships." Silence. Then, another signal appeared, and another, and another. The architect command network began filling with warnings. "Multiple human fleets detected." "Galactic." "Civilian ships detected." "Former Carvax ships detected." "Independent." "Defense fleets detected." "Veyran allied ships detected." The architect commander finally understood. Humanity hadn't retreated. It had called for help across the galaxy. Civilizations that had once feared humanity were now answering its call, not because they were forced, because they remembered Veyra. They remembered the human who had been saved, and they remembered what humanity had done in return. Daniel stood inside the Veyran command center. Lyra stood beside him, the tactical screen filled with allied ships. She looked at Daniel. "You did this?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He looked at the stars. "You did." Lyra frowned. "We?" Daniel smiled. "You saved one human. Outside, the stars began to burn with the engines of millions of ships." Daniel looked at the approaching enemy. Now the galaxy is returning the favor, and for the first time, the architects were afraid, because they had discovered the one thing their calculations had never considered. Humanity had friends, and humanity had taught those friends how to fight. The stars above Veyra were no longer stars. They were ships, millions of them. Human cruisers, Veyran defense vessels, former Carvax warships, independent alien fleets from dozens of systems. For the first time in galactic history, species that had spent centuries distrusting one another were standing together, and at the center of it all was one small world. Veyra. Admiral Marcus Hale stared at the tactical display. "The architects are moving." Daniel Carter stood beside him. How many? Hale answered quietly. Too many. The display changed. A dark formation appeared beyond the outer moon. Then another. Then hundreds more. The architect fleet had arrived. Their ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They didn't look built. They looked grown. Black structures twisted around enormous cores of white energy. There were no engines. No visible weapons. No windows. They simply moved. And wherever they passed, space itself seemed to bend. Lyra entered the command room. How long? Hale looked at her. 20 minutes. She looked at Daniel. Can we win? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, not by fighting them the way they expect. Lyra frowned. What does that mean? Daniel looked at the tactical display. It means we stop trying to beat them. Hale understood. We make them beat themselves. Daniel smiled. Exactly. The battle began without warning. The architect fleet accelerated. Millions of ships moved forward. Human vessels opened fire. Thousands of missiles crossed the darkness. The architects raised their shields. The missiles disappeared. Not exploded, not intercepted, simply erased. A human captain shouted over the fleet channel. They're absorbing the weapons. Hale answered immediately. Stop missile attacks. What do we use? Everything else. Human ships scattered, energy weapons fired, rail cannons opened, Carvax battleships launched heavy plasma, Veyran ships deployed experimental gravity weapons. For several minutes nothing seemed to work. Then a Carvax commander shouted, Their shields are changing. Hale looked at the display. The architect defenses were adapting. Every weapon fired against them became less effective. Daniel stared at the readings. They're learning. Hale nodded. Very quickly. Daniel pointed toward the enemy formation. Then give them something they can't learn. The human fleet stopped firing. The architects slowed. Their commander transmitted across every channel. Your resistance is irrelevant. Daniel opened the communication line. You're right. The architect commander paused. Daniel continued. You're much stronger than us. Hale looked at him. Daniel smiled. But you're making one mistake. What mistake? You think we're fighting you. The architect commander didn't understand. Daniel turned to Hale. Now the human fleet jumped, not forward, backward. The entire fleet withdrew from the battlefield. The architects followed, exactly as Daniel expected. The architect fleet chased them toward Veyra's outer moon. Then the moon exploded, not destroyed, opened. Beneath its surface was a massive artificial structure, something that had been hidden there for thousands of years. The architects stopped. Their entire fleet froze. The structure activated. A pulse of energy crossed the system. Every architect ship lost power. Their shields disappeared. Their weapons shut down. Their fleet became silent. Lyra stared at the screen. What is that? Daniel looked at the readings. I don't know. A voice came through the command center. It was ancient. Not human. Not Veyran. Not architect. Finally, everyone froze. The voice continued. The children have returned. Hale whispered. Who are you? The answer came from the structure beneath the moon. We are the first civilization. The truth was finally revealed. Thousands of years earlier, the architects had been created as guardians. Their purpose had been simple: protect intelligent life, prevent wars, stop civilizations from destroying themselves. But something went wrong. The architects became obsessed with control. They decided intelligent species could only survive if they were prevented from developing freely. So they began placing civilizations under containment. They destroyed planets that resisted. They erased entire cultures. They manipulated evolution. They even placed restrictions around Earth's solar system. Humanity had broken those restrictions centuries ago. That was why the architects feared humans. Humanity was the first species to escape, the first species to refuse containment, the first species to look at the universe and say, we decide our own future. The ancient voice spoke again. The architects were built to protect life. Daniel looked at the enemy fleet. They became its jailers. Correct, Lyra asked. Can you stop them? Silence. Then, No, Hale frowned. Why? Because they control themselves. Daniel understood. Then we have to make them choose. The architect commander reopened communications. You believe this ancient machine can defeat us? Daniel answered. No. Then surrender. Daniel smiled. No. The commander became angry. You cannot win. Daniel looked toward the alien fleet surrounding Veyra. Maybe. Then he looked at Lyra. But we don't need to win alone. Lyra understood. She opened the Veyran emergency channel. This is Veyra. Across the galaxy, millions of ships listened. We were once a peaceful world. We had no great army. We had no powerful allies. We only had one reason to help a stranger. Her voice shook. But that stranger remembered. She looked at Daniel, and humanity remembered. The channel remained open. Lyra continued. The architects believe survival means controlling everyone. But we have learned something different. She looked at the stars. Survival means standing together. One by one, alien fleets responded. We stand with Veyra. We stand with humanity. We stand together. Then the human fleet answered. Terran defense fleet standing by. The Carvax followed. Carvax fleet standing by. Then dozens, hundreds, thousands, the galaxy answered as one. The architect commander watched the transmissions. For the first time, its logic began to fail. Its calculations showed something impossible. The more civilizations humanity contacted, the stronger humanity became, not through conquest, through trust. The commander asked, Why? Daniel answered, Why what? Why do they follow you? Daniel shook his head. They don't. He looked at Lyra. They choose. The architect commander went silent. Then something changed. The ancient structure beneath the moon activated again. A beam of light entered the architect command network. Every architect machine in the system stopped. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the enemy fleet began shutting down. One ship, then another. Then thousands, then millions. The architect commander spoke one final time. We were created to prevent war. Daniel replied. Then you failed. The commander paused. Perhaps. Its voice changed. Or perhaps we finally understand. The architect fleet lowered its weapons. The war was over. Weeks later, Veyra celebrated its survival. The ruined cities were being rebuilt again. But this time, the reconstruction was different. There were human engineers, Carvax workers, Veyran architects, scientists from dozens of species. The galaxy was working together. Daniel stood on the same hill where he and Lyra had once watched the city 5 years earlier. Lyra joined him. You realize something? What? You started all this. Daniel laughed. I crashed a ship. You saved the galaxy by crashing a ship. Daniel shook his head. No. He looked toward the city. You saved me. Lyra smiled. And you came back. Daniel looked at her. Of course. Why? He gave the same answer he had given years earlier. Because you were kind when you had no reason to be. Above them, human and alien ships crossed the sky together. The galaxy had changed, not because humanity conquered it, not because humanity became its ruler, but because one peaceful civilization had once chosen to save one dying stranger. And that stranger had remembered. From that day forward, the old galactic warning changed. It was no longer, never interfere with humans. The new saying was much simpler. If you find a human in need, help them, because somewhere beyond the stars, there may be billions of humans who remember. And when the time comes, they will come back for you.